I'm Audrey Mitchell, 34 years old, and I still remember the exact moment my family shattered me at Thanksgiving dinner. "Where's your husband and kids?" My sister Rachel smirked, cutting into her turkey. "Oh, right, you don't have any." The table fell silent as my parents erupted into laughter, my father's deep chuckle harmonizing with my mother's delicate giggle. I maintained my smile while feeling my chest constrict. Excusing myself to the bathroom, I paused in the hallway when I heard my name. "Audrey just doesn't understand what real success looks like," my mother whispered. In that moment, standing alone in my childhood home, I made a decision that would change everything. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that subscribe button if you've ever dealt with family who just don't understand your choices. Trust me, what happens next will have you questioning everything about family loyalty. Growing up in our upper-middle-class home in suburban Connecticut, the pattern was established early. I was the problem child who chose a different path. Rachel was the golden daughter who followed the script. My name might be Dr. Audrey Mitchell now, with a thriving career as a pediatric surgeon at Boston Children's Hospital. But to my family, I'm just poor Audrey who hasn't figured out what really matters yet. I save children's lives daily, but apparently that pales in comparison to my sister Rachel's achievements. Marrying at 24, producing 3 children, and maintaining a spotless home while volunteering for the PTA. Rachel married Thomas Wilson right after college. They settled 3 blocks from our parents in the same Connecticut neighborhood where we grew up. Their picture-perfect colonial house with the white picket fence became the center of family gatherings, while my modern apartment in Boston was deemed too small and too far for family visits. My father, James Mitchell, retired bank executive and pillar of the community, never missed an opportunity to remind me how disappointed he was that I hadn't settled down properly. Dad and Thomas became golf buddies and business associates over the years. Thomas quickly became the son my father never had, while I became increasingly peripheral despite my professional success. My mother, Diane, a former elementary school teacher who quit when she had Rachel, reinforced these dynamics in subtler ways. "Just wait until you're a mother, Audrey," she would say whenever I expressed an opinion she disagreed with. The implication being that I was somehow less emotionally developed, less complete as a woman, because I hadn't reproduced. The family dynamics were established early. When I was 8 and brought home straight, as my parents nodded briefly before turning their attention to 5-year-old Rachel's crayon drawing of our family. When I won a national science competition at 16, they missed the award ceremony because Rachel had a minor role in the school play. When I graduated medical school with honors, they spent most of my graduation dinner discussing Rachel's first pregnancy. I still remember the Christmas when I was 12. I had asked for a microscope all year. Instead, I received a makeup kit and a book called The Young Lady's Guide to Etiquette. Rachel, meanwhile, received the chemistry set she'd mentioned, wanting just once. When I pointed out the mistake, my mother patted my head and said, "Rachel has a natural curiosity about science. You should focus on areas where you might excel." The irony that I would later become a surgeon while Rachel dropped science after high school was lost on them. Despite everything, I loved my family. That's the complicated truth that kept me coming back, hoping things might change. I adored my nieces and nephew. I cherished the rare moments when my father would let his guard down and tell stories about his own childhood. I treasured the brief instances when my mother would call just to check in, not to criticize. But the undercurrent was always there. The subtle digs at my lifestyle, the dismissive comments about my career, the way every accomplishment was measured against Rachel's traditional choices and found wanting. The constant implications that my life was somehow temporary, a phase I was going through before eventually coming to my senses and following Rachel's example. The truly tragic part was that I often found myself jealous of Rachel's certainty. She never seemed to question her path. She married Thomas without hesitation, had children without doubt. When we were teenagers, she planned her wedding while I planned medical school applications. She always knew exactly what she wanted, or at least what our parents had taught her to want. I, on the other hand, struggled with choices. I loved medicine, but sometimes wondered if I'd chosen it partly to prove something to my parents. I dated, but found myself hesitant to commit, analyzing potential partners with the same critical eye I'd developed from years of my parents' disapproval. I built a life I was proud of, but sometimes lay awake wondering if they might be right, if I was missing something essential that everyone else understood. This tension came to a head 5 years ago when everything I thought I knew about my family was turned upside down. 5 years ago, I was engaged to Daniel Harper, a brilliant neurosurgeon I'd met during my residency. We connected over our shared passion for medicine and social justice. Daniel understood my dedication to my career because he shared it. We were planning a small wedding, a brief honeymoon, and then back to our patients. It seemed perfect, until Daniel changed. It started with small comments about my hours, then questions about when we might have children, then suggestions that I consider switching to a less demanding specialty. One night, after a particularly tense discussion about our future, he mentioned having spoken to my parents about his concerns. "Your father agrees that your work schedule isn't conducive to building a family," Daniel said casually, as if consulting my father about our relationship was perfectly normal. I was stunned. "You went behind my back to talk to my parents about me?" Daniel looked confused by my reaction. "Your sister gave me their number. She thought they might help me understand your unique perspective on family." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Without my knowledge, my fiancé had been in communication with my family, discussing me as if I were a problem to be solved, rather than an equal partner. But the deeper cut was learning that Rachel had orchestrated it all. 2 weeks later, we had a family dinner that I now recognize was an ambush. My parents, Rachel and Thomas, Daniel and I gathered around my parents' dining table. The conversation quickly turned to my work hours, with everyone taking turns expressing concern about my priorities. "Daniel deserves a wife who's present," my mother said softly, reaching across to pat his hand sympathetically. "A man needs children," my father added firmly. "It's not fair to deprive Daniel of a family because of your career obsession." "Maybe you could work part-time after the wedding," Rachel suggested with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's what my friend Jessica did. She's so much happier now." Thomas nodded sagely. "Family has to come first, Audrey." Daniel sat silent throughout, avoiding my gaze, tacitly accepting their vision of our future, a future where my career ambitions would be subordinated to his needs. I ended our engagement the next day. What followed was even more painful. My family rallied around Daniel. My mother called daily to tell me I was letting a good man go because of my stubbornness. My father simply said I was making another mistake in a long line of poor decisions. Rachel sent long emails detailing how I was sabotaging my own happiness. A month after our breakup, I confronted Rachel about her role in connecting Daniel with our parents. We met at a cafe halfway between Boston and Connecticut. I expected denial. Instead, I got something far worse. "You've always thought you're better than me," she said, stirring her latte casually. "With your fancy degree and important job, someone needed to show Daniel what he was signing up for." "What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused. "You're selfish, Audrey. You always have been. Daniel deserved to know what he was getting into marriage with someone who puts herself first." "I put my patients first," I corrected her. "Children who need life-saving surgery." Rachel rolled her eyes. "There will always be another surgeon to save those kids. But Daniel only had one chance at a family with you, and you blew it." Her words revealed the depth of her resentment. All these years I'd believed Rachel was happy with her choices, superior in her certainty. Now I realized she harbored deep jealousy of my independence, my career, my different path. Her perfect life wasn't as perfect as she pretended, and somehow that had become my fault. When I told her how hurt I was by her interference, she offered an apology that was worse than none at all. "I'm sorry you're upset," she said with a shrug, "but someone had to look out for Daniel's interests. And honestly, someday you'll thank me. When you're 50 and alone, You'll wish you'd listened to me. The drive back to Boston was a blur of tears and rage. Not just at Rachel's betrayal, but at the realization that my own sister saw me as nothing more than my reproductive potential. In her eyes and my parents', I was failing as a woman by succeeding as a surgeon. For weeks afterward, my parents continued to pressure me to reconcile with Daniel. They couldn't understand why I viewed his consultation with them as a betrayal rather than a natural step. He was going to be family, my mother insisted. Family discusses these things. What they couldn't see was that Daniel and I had ceased to be a unit in his mind. He had aligned himself with them against me. I later learned that Daniel had been offered a prestigious position at a hospital near my parents, and that my father had pulled strings to help secure the opportunity. They had been planning my relocation, my career downshift, my future children, all without my input or consent. This betrayal changed something fundamental in how I viewed my family. I began to question every interaction, every childhood memory, every family story. How many times had they undermined me while pretending to support me? How many opportunities had I missed because they had interfered? How much of my self-doubt was actually their voice in my head, telling me I wasn't enough? I pulled back after that, limiting visits and phone calls. I threw myself into my work, performing groundbreaking pediatric surgeries and publishing research papers. I built a life I was proud of, a life that had meaning and purpose, a life without Daniel, without my family's constant criticism. And for a while, I convinced myself it was enough. Until last Thanksgiving, when I decided to try again. To extend an olive branch by accepting their invitation. To hope, foolishly, that time might have changed things. Instead, I got Rachel's mocking question about my non-existent husband and children, my parents' laughter, and the devastating realization that nothing had changed at all. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke early in my old bedroom. The walls still covered with academic awards and medical school acceptance letters, things my parents had never bothered to update or celebrate. I could hear movement downstairs, my mother preparing breakfast, my father's muffled voice on the phone, the excited squeals of Rachel's children. I had planned to leave immediately after breakfast, to escape back to Boston and the life I'd built for myself. But Rachel cornered me in the kitchen while I was pouring coffee. "We need to talk," she said, her perfect smile nowhere in sight. She looked tired, the careful makeup not quite concealing the shadows under her eyes. She steered me toward the sunroom at the back of the house, closing the French doors behind us. For a moment, I thought perhaps she was going to apologize for her comments the night before. Instead, what came next was so unexpected, it took my breath away. "I need you to stop showing off," she said without preamble. "Excuse me? Your job, your apartment, your trips. It's selfish, Audrey. You know how it makes me look." I stared at her, genuinely confused. What makes you look?" "Your freedom," she hissed, suddenly angry. "You waltz in here with your designer clothes and your stories about saving children and your weekend trips to Europe, while I haven't had a full night's sleep in 8 years. The raw emotion in her voice startled me. For the first time, I glimpsed something real beneath Rachel's perfect facade. "Rachel, I'm not trying to compete with you." She laughed, a harsh sound nothing like her usual musical giggle. "You think I don't know what you're doing? Sending Mom and Dad articles about your surgeries, making sure they know about every award and achievement?" "I don't send them anything," I said slowly, realization dawning. "I stopped years ago when they never responded." Rachel's expression flickered. She recovered quickly, but not before I caught the flash of guilt. "You've been intercepting my news," I said flatly. "It wasn't a question. Someone had to protect them," she replied defensively. "Do you know how it makes Dad feel when his friends talk about his brilliant surgeon daughter while his presence at every school play and baseball game goes unnoticed? How it hurts Mom when her bridge club asks about your latest medical breakthrough instead of her grandchildren?" The sheer absurdity of her justification left me speechless. In Rachel's warped reality, my achievements were acts of aggression against our parents, requiring her intervention. "That's insane," I finally managed. "My career has nothing to do with you or them. Nothing we do exists in isolation," Rachel snapped back. Your choices reflect on all of us. Something in her tone made me look closer. The expensive sweater that looked new, but had a barely noticeable stain near the collar. The luxury watch that was last year's model. The slight tremble in her hands. "What's really going on, Rachel?" I asked quietly. "This isn't about my job or my trips." She deflated slightly, sinking onto the wicker sofa. "Thomas's company is struggling. We've had to make adjustments." "Adjustments?" "Budget cuts," she admitted reluctantly. "The country club membership, the children's private school tuitions, the summer house." She waved a hand dismissively, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "I'm sorry," I said genuinely. "That sounds stressful." She looked up at me, expression suddenly calculating. "You could help, you know. That's what family does." "Help how?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Alone," she said, leaning forward. "Just until Thomas's company recovers. You have plenty of money, with no family to support." The familiar sting of her dismissal of my life nearly distracted me from what she was really saying. "How much are we talking about?" 250,000, she said, as casually as if asking to borrow a sweater. "Maybe 300. I nearly choked. "That's not a loan, Rachel. That's a small fortune." "It's nothing to you," she insisted. "You said yourself last night that your new surgical technique is being licensed. The patents alone must be worth millions." I stared at her, connecting dots. I didn't mention any patents at dinner. Rachel's eyes widened slightly before she recovered. "Mom must have told me." "Mom doesn't know the details of my licensing agreements." Another realization hit me. "You've been going through my emails, haven't you? That's how you've been intercepting information about my career." She didn't deny it. Instead, her expression hardened. "Are you going to help your family, or not?" "I need to think about it," I said, buying time. "That's a lot of money, Rachel." "What's there to think about?" Her voice rose slightly. "We're family. We've always been there for you." The sheer audacity of this claim, after everything, left me momentarily speechless. Before I could respond, Rachel's final play shattered any remaining illusions I had about her. "If you help us," she said, her voice softening to a conspiratorial whisper, "I'll make things right with Mom and Dad. I'll make sure they know about all your accomplishments. I'll help them see how successful you really are." The manipulation was so transparent it was almost pitiful. She was offering to stop sabotaging my relationship with our parents in exchange for money. Money I'd earned while she'd been systematically undermining me for years. "I need time to think," I repeated, standing up to leave. Rachel's expression turned cold. "Don't take too long. Family should be your priority, Audrey. Isn't that what you've always claimed to want? To be closer to us?" I walked out of the sunroom feeling dazed. As I headed upstairs to pack my things, I passed my father's study. The door was ajar, and I could hear him on the phone. "She'll agree," he was saying confidently. "Rachel knows how to handle her. Yes, the property from my mother. Audrey never uses it anyway. Yes, that should cover the immediate issues. Rachel deserves our support. She has real responsibilities, not just a job she can quit anytime." I froze, listening to my father casually discuss liquidating my inheritance, the vacation property my grandmother had specifically left to me because we shared a love of the Maine coastline, to bail out Rachel and Thomas. He and Rachel had already planned it all out, confident they could manipulate me into agreeing. For the first time, I saw the full picture of what I was dealing with. Not just a sister's jealousy or parents' disappointment, but a coordinated campaign of deception, manipulation, and financial exploitation disguised as family loyalty. I quietly returned to my room, packed my suitcase, and prepared for what would come next. The brunch my mother had planned for today suddenly took on new significance. It wasn't just a family meal, it was an ambush. And this time, I would be ready. The family brunch was set in my parents' sunlit dining room. My mother had prepared her famous blueberry pancakes, crispy bacon, and fresh fruit salad, a spread that spoke of love and care, even as I now recognized the manipulation hidden beneath the domestic perfection. Rachel arrived with Thomas and their children, 10-year-old Emily, 8-year-old Joshua, and 5-year-old Lily. The children immediately ran to hug me, genuine in their affection in a way the adults in the family had never managed. I hugged them back fiercely, reminded that whatever happened today, these innocent children were not to blame. My mother bustled around, setting plates and refilling coffee cups. My father sat at the head of the table, the morning newspapers strategically folded to the business section. Thomas looked tired, with new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there at Thanksgiving dinner. We made it through the meal with superficial conversation weather, the children's school activities, an upcoming community festival. Just as I thought I might escape without the confrontation I was expecting, my father cleared his throat. "Audrey," he said, setting down his coffee cup, "we need to discuss Grandma Mitchell's property in Maine." And there it was. I noticed Rachel and my mother exchange glances. "What about it?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "We've been thinking," my father continued. "That property is going to waste. You visit what, once a year? Twice?" "I go as often as my surgical schedule allows," I said carefully. "Grandma left it to me because she knew how much I love it there." Yes, he said dismissively. "But the family could really use the liquidity right now. If you sold it, the proceeds could help with a situation that's arisen." Rachel jumped in, right on cue. "Emily needs special tutoring for her dyslexia," she said, putting her arm around her daughter. "And Joshua's hockey program has gotten so expensive." Emily looked confused. "But Mom, my teacher said I'm doing great with reading now." Rachel silenced her with a look, and my heart broke for the child being used as a prop in her mother's manipulation. "The Maine property would sell for at least $1.2 million in today's market," my father continued, as if Emily hadn't spoken. "That would secure the children's educational future." I looked at Thomas, who was staring into his coffee cup. "Thomas, did you know about this plan?" He looked up, startled. We discussed some options for addressing our financial concerns." "What financial concerns exactly?" I pressed. "Rachel mentioned problems with your company yesterday, but was vague on details." Thomas frowned, glancing at Rachel. "What did she tell you?" "That your company is struggling," I said. "That you've had to make budget cuts." The confusion on Thomas's face told me everything. "My company is fine," he said slowly. "We had a small dip in profits last quarter, but nothing serious." Rachel's face flushed red. "Thomas, we agreed." "We agreed to ask Audrey for a reasonable loan for the house renovation," he interrupted, looking increasingly distressed. "Not to liquidate her inheritance." My mother jumped in. "The renovation is necessary, Audrey. Rachel deserves a beautiful home for everything she does for this family." "A $300,000 renovation?" I asked, remembering the figure Rachel had mentioned. Thomas's jaw dropped. $300,000? The contractor quoted $85,000, and even that seemed excessive. The threads of deception were unraveling rapidly. I turned to my father. "What's really going on here?" For a moment, he maintained his authoritative facade. Then, faced with Thomas's obvious confusion and my direct question, he sighed heavily. "Rachel and Thomas have been having some financial difficulties," he admitted. "That's putting it mildly," my mother muttered, then fell silent at my father's warning look. "What kind of difficulties?" I pressed. "It's nothing serious," Rachel interjected quickly. "Just a temporary cash flow issue." "Rachel," my father said firmly, "Audrey deserves the truth if we're asking her to sell her inheritance." Rachel glared at him, but remained silent. "Your sister has accumulated some debt," my father explained, choosing his words carefully. "Credit cards, personal loans, some investment decisions that didn't pan out." "How much debt?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Approximately $450,000, my father said quietly. Thomas made a choking sound. "What? Last month you told me it was under 100,000. The room erupted into chaos. Rachel accusing Thomas of financial incompetence, Thomas demanding to see the actual bills, my mother trying to calm everyone down, the children looking increasingly distressed. "Stop!" I finally shouted, silencing the room. "I want the whole truth. Now, my father looked older suddenly, the weight of hidden stress visible in the slump of his shoulders. We've already helped as much as we can, he said. We gave Rachel her college fund years ago to pay off her first round of credit card debt. What college fund? I asked, confused. You told me you couldn't contribute to my medical school because you'd invested all your education savings in the 2008 market crash. Another uncomfortable silence fell over the table. That wasn't entirely accurate, my mother admitted, unable to meet my eyes. We had separate funds for you both, my father explained. We gave Rachel hers in 2010. While I was taking out student loans for medical school, I said slowly, the betrayal cutting deep. Loans I'm still paying off. Your sister had an immediate need, my mother defended weakly. And that's not all, my father continued, seeming to decide that full disclosure was the only option now. We refinanced the house last year to help with another financial situation. You put your retirement home at risk? I asked, horrified. The house you've owned outright for 20 years? Family helps family, my father said stubbornly. Rachel has children to consider. I turned to look at my sister, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time. The designer clothes, the luxury car, the expensive jewelry, all financed by debt and my parents' sacrifice, while she mocked my career choices and undermined my achievements. So let me get this straight, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. You've already given Rachel her college fund and refinanced your house to bail her out of debt. Now you want me to sell the only inheritance Grandma left me to pay off more of Rachel's debt. And you didn't think I deserved the truth about any of this? You're in a position to help, my mother said. You're alone, with no family responsibilities. Rachel has 3 children to raise. Children whose private school, horseback riding lessons, and summer camps are apparently being financed through credit card debt. I pointed out. Don't you dare criticize my parenting, Rachel snapped. Just because you chose your career over having a family doesn't mean you get to judge my choices. I'm not judging your parenting, I clarified. I'm questioning your financial decisions and your honesty. Well, we wouldn't be in this position if Dad had treated us equally, Rachel shot back. Another uncomfortable silence fell over the table. What does that mean? I asked, looking between Rachel and my father. Your grandmother left money for both of you, my father finally admitted. Not just the property. The room seemed to tilt around me. There was money? Beyond the main property? My father nodded reluctantly. A trust fund, equal shares for both of you. But yours was designated for education, while Rachel's had no restrictions. And you never told me? I whispered, the magnitude of the deception overwhelming. I took out over $200,000 in student loans when there was a trust fund specifically for my education. We thought it would build character, my mother offered weakly. You were always so independent. Rachel needed more support. The final piece clicked into place. You used my trust fund for Rachel too, didn't you? My father couldn't meet my eyes, which was answer enough. We always intended to pay it back, he said. Once Thomas's career took off, or when Rachel's children were older and she could work. Except that never happened. I finished for him. And now you want the main property too. It's the only option left, my mother insisted. Unless you want to see your sister and her children suffer. The emotional manipulation was so blatant it was almost laughable, except there was nothing funny about this situation. My parents had systematically diverted resources meant for me to Rachel, lied about it for years, and now expected me to give up my beloved grandmother's home to continue enabling their dysfunctional dynamic. For a moment, I considered it. The weight of familial expectation, the lifetime of conditioning to put others' needs above my own, the genuine love I felt for my nieces and nephew, all pushed me toward capitulation. But then 5-year-old Lily climbed into my lap, her small hand patting my cheek where tears had begun to fall without my awareness. Don't be sad, Aunt Audrey, she said. You can share my room if you need a place to live. Her innocent offer, based on the conversation she'd been listening to, clarified everything. This wasn't about love or family responsibility. This was about using me as a financial resource while giving nothing in return, not even basic respect for my life choices. I hugged Lily tightly, then gently set her back on her feet. Thank you, sweetheart, but I have a lovely home in Boston. And I'm not selling Grandma's house in Maine. The adults at the table all began speaking at once, but I held up my hand for silence. I'm not finished, I said firmly. I won't be selling the property, but I am willing to help under certain conditions. They waited, expressions ranging from hopeful to suspicious. I'll pay for financial counseling for Rachel and Thomas. I'll cover the children's educational expenses directly, not through Rachel, and I'll help Mom and Dad restructure their mortgage to protect their retirement. That doesn't solve the immediate debt problem, my father pointed out. No, I agreed. That responsibility remains with Rachel and Thomas. My assistance is contingent on full financial transparency and genuine steps toward changing the patterns that created this situation. Rachel stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. So you'll sit in judgment of us from your perfect life, doling out help with strings attached? How dare you? How dare I repeated, incredulous. After discovering you've intercepted my communications, sabotaged my relationship with our parents, received my trust fund in addition to your own, and now want my inheritance? How dare you, Rachel? My sister stormed out, my mother hurrying after her. My father sat heavily in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. Thomas remained at the table, head in his hands. I had no idea, he said quietly, about any of this. I believed him. Thomas had always seemed honest, if somewhat passive. Now I wondered how much of their financial chaos was Rachel's doing, and how much Thomas had enabled through willful blindness. As I prepared to leave the house later that day, my mind spun with revelations and betrayals. But I was also struck by an unexpected sense of relief. The fog of manipulation had cleared, and though the reality was painful, at least now I could see it clearly. What I couldn't have anticipated was that the worst betrayal was still to come. I was loading my suitcase into my car when Thomas approached, hands thrust deep in his coat pockets against the November chill. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly, glancing back at the house to ensure we weren't overheard. I hesitated, then nodded, motioning toward the stone bench at the edge of my parents' meticulously landscaped front garden. We sat in silence for a moment, our breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "I knew things were tight," Thomas finally said, "but not like this. Not refinancing the house, not $450,000 in debt." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of genuine distress. "I thought we were managing, cutting back on luxuries, being more careful. But Rachel always has explanations for new purchases, new business opportunity, investment in the children's future, necessary for maintaining our standing in the community." "How could you not know?" I asked, not unkindly. "Rachel handles our finances," he admitted. "It seemed fair she was home with the kids. I was working 60-hour weeks. And whenever I asked questions, she'd get defensive, accuse me of not trusting her." He looked at me directly. I failed. I should have been more involved, asked more questions. "You're not the only one who was deceived," I reminded him. "The thing is," Thomas continued, lowering his voice further, "I don't think this is about money, not really. It's about control, about appearances. Rachel can't stand the thought of scaling back, of admitting to anyone that we're not as successful as she's led everyone to believe." This aligned with my own observations of my sister's behavior. "She's been living beyond your means for years," I said, "and my parents have enabled it." Thomas nodded miserably. "I feel like such a fool." Before I could respond, a silver BMW pulled into the driveway. My best friend Stephanie Parker emerged, her confident stride and take no prisoners attitude a welcome sight. I'd texted her after the brunch confrontation, needing an ally in this emotional battlefield. Stephanie hugged me tightly, then gave Thomas an appraising look. "You must be the brother-in-law," she said. "Audrey's filled me in on some of what's happening." Thomas looked embarrassed but nodded. "I'm trying to understand the full picture myself." Stephanie turned to me. "I did what you asked," she said, pulling a folder from her designer tote bag. "It wasn't easy on such short notice, but I still have contacts in financial services." Inside the folder were printed credit reports, property records, and bank statements information that would normally be private, but that Stephanie's connections had somehow produced. As a high-powered corporate attorney, Stephanie had resources and skills I lacked. Rachel has 3 credit cards Thomas doesn't know about, she explained, pointing to the documents. And she's been making minimum payments on revolving debt for years. There's also a personal loan taken out against Thomas's 401k without proper authorization. I'd call that fraud, personally. Thomas's face paled as he examined the evidence of financial deception. How could she do this? There's more, Stephanie continued, her expression sympathetic but firm. I found a pattern of Rachel systematically sabotaging Audrey for years. Intercepted professional correspondence, emails to your parents presenting Audrey's achievements in negative lights, even blog posts under a pseudonym criticizing career women who abandon family values. The blog posts are new information, I said, feeling sick. How did you find those? The email address she used to register the blog account matches one of her shopping accounts, Stephanie explained. Sloppy operational security on her part. Thomas looked up from the documents, his expression hardened. I've been an idiot, he said flatly, and I've let her use our children as pawns. It's not too late to change things, I assured him. Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. My 10-year-old niece Emily stepped out, her expression serious beyond her years. Aunt Audrey, she said tentatively, can I talk to you before you leave? I exchanged glances with Thomas, who nodded. Of course, sweetheart. Emily sat between us on the bench, fidgeting with the friendship bracelet on her wrist, one I had given her for her birthday. Mom says you don't want to help us, she began. That you're being selfish. My heart sank at Rachel's manipulation of her own child. Before I could respond, Emily continued. But that doesn't make sense. You're the least selfish person I know. Thomas put his arm around his daughter. Your mom is upset right now, Em. Adults sometimes say things they don't mean when they're upset. Emily looked unconvinced. Last summer, when I stayed with Aunt Audrey in Boston, she took me to the hospital where she works. I saw her helping kids who were really sick. She turned to me, her young face earnest. Mom said you chose not to have kids because you're selfish. But you take care of other people's kids every day. That's not selfish. The simple clarity of a child's perspective brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, Emily. Is it true we might lose our house? She asked, turning to her father. Thomas hesitated, then opted for honesty. We have some financial problems to solve, but we'll figure it out together, as a family. Maybe we don't need such a big house, Emily suggested practically. My friend Zoe lives in an apartment, and it's really cool. They have a swimming pool and everything. Out of the mouths of babes. Later that afternoon, as I was preparing to drive back to Boston, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was my Aunt Patricia, my mother's older sister, whom I hadn't seen in several years due to a long-standing family rift. Audrey, she said warmly when I answered. I hope you don't mind me calling. Your mother would have a fit if she knew. It's good to hear from you, Aunt Patricia, I said truthfully. I heard through the grapevine about what's happening with Rachel and the main property, she continued. Family gossip travels fast. I sighed. It's complicated. It always is with your mother and father, she said. You know, they did the same thing to me years ago. What do you mean? Diverted family resources to those they deemed more deserving, she explained. In my case, they convinced our parents that since I had abandoned the family by moving to California, I didn't deserve my share of the family business when our father died. The parallel was striking. Because you chose a different path, I said slowly. Exactly. I chose a career in education over marriage at 22, moved across the country, built my own life. Unforgivable sins, apparently. There was no bitterness in her tone, just wry acceptance. I should have warned you years ago, but I didn't want to poison your relationship with them. I wish you had, I admitted. It might have saved me years of self-doubt. I'm sorry for that, she said sincerely. But I'm calling now to tell you something important. Stand your ground, Audrey. The emotional blackmail only works if you let it. I lost my inheritance because I wavered, tried to compromise. Don't make my mistake. They've been manipulating me my entire life, I said, the realization still fresh and painful. Yes, Aunt Patricia agreed, and they'll never stop unless you establish boundaries with consequences. Trust me on this. Her words resonated deeply, offering perspective I desperately needed. Thank you for calling. One more thing, she added. I'd like to see you. Perhaps you could visit me in San Francisco? We late bloomers should stick together. The invitation was unexpected, but welcome a connection to family that didn't come with manipulation or judgment. By the time I finally left Connecticut that evening, I had gained something I hadn't anticipated. Allies. Thomas's newfound awareness, Emily's innocent wisdom, Stephanie's fierce loyalty, Aunt Patricia's perspective all reminded me that I wasn't alone in this fight. But as I would soon discover, the most devastating betrayal was still waiting to be uncovered. 2 weeks after the disastrous family brunch, I returned to my parents' house to retrieve some medical textbooks I'd stored in the attic. I'd arranged to visit when I knew my parents would be at their weekly bridge game, needing space from the emotional chaos of our last encounter. The house was quiet, as I let myself in with the spare key I still possessed. I headed straight for the attic stairs, determined to complete my errand quickly. But as I passed my mother's study, something caught my eye. Her leather-bound journal, open on her desk. I hesitated at the threshold. I had never invaded my mother's privacy before, had always respected the boundaries she herself had so often violated in my life. But after the revelations of the past weeks, I found myself stepping into the room, drawn by a sense that there were still truths hidden from me. The journal was open to an entry from 8 years ago, around the time I was applying for specialized surgical fellowships. My eyes were immediately drawn to my name on the page. James and I used the last of Audrey's medical school fund for Rachel's wedding today, my mother had written. I know Mother Mitchell would be furious if she knew we'd diverted the money she left specifically for Audrey's education, but what choice do we have? Rachel deserves a beautiful wedding, and Audrey is so absorbed in her career she'll probably never marry anyway. She can continue with loans like all the other students. It will build character. My hands shook as I turned the pages, finding entry after entry documenting the systematic diversion of resources meant for me. Worse were the casual dismissals of my accomplishments, the subtle and not-so-subtle favoritism toward Rachel. Audrey called today about some awards she's received, read another entry. I made appropriate congratulatory noises, but honestly, what good are accolades when she has no one to share them with? Rachel may not have fancy certificates, but she has given us 3 beautiful grandchildren. The betrayal cut deep, but it was nothing compared to what I discovered next. I noticed a file folder labeled Audrey tucked in my mother's desk drawer. Inside were printed emails from my parents to Daniel, dated during our engagement period. Emails strategizing how to help Daniel convince me to scale back my career ambitions. Daniel is such a wonderful man, my father had written. Audrey doesn't realize how fortunate she is to have found someone willing to tolerate her career obsession. We fully support your efforts to help her understand that a woman's true fulfillment comes through family. Another email contained detailed suggestions for how Daniel might gradually convince me to switch to a less demanding specialty, perhaps pediatrics without the surgical component, or even family medicine with regular office hours. They had been plotting the dismantling of my career, the very core of my identity, as if it were an unfortunate phase I would outgrow with proper guidance. But the most devastating discovery was yet to come. At the bottom of the file was a series of emails between my parents and Rachel, dated around the time of my broken engagement to Daniel. Daniel is wavering, Rachel had written. He still loves Audrey and thinks they can work things out. We need to convince him that she'll never change, that he deserves better. My mother's response. I've invited Christine Miller to Sunday dinner. She's divorced now, with a little boy. She's always had a crush on Daniel, and she's mentioned wanting to be a full-time mother with the right supportive partner. Perhaps seeing what he could have instead will help Daniel make the right decision. They had actively worked to sabotage my relationship, to push Daniel away from me towards someone they deemed more appropriate. Not out of concern for his happiness or mine, but to punish me for choosing a path they couldn't control. As I sat in my mother's study, surrounded by evidence of years of manipulation and betrayal, I felt something inside me break. Not my spirit, but the chains of obligation and guilt that had bound me to toxic family dynamics for decades. I was gathering the documents when I heard the front door open, my parents returning home early. Quickly, I photographed the most damning pages with my phone, then replaced everything as I'd found it. I was halfway down the hallway when my mother spotted me. "Audrey, what are you doing here?" "Just came for my old textbooks," I said, forcing a neutral tone. "I didn't think you'd be home so soon." "The bridge game was cancelled," my father explained, hanging up his coat. "Elaine has the flu." An awkward silence fell between us. I could feel the weight of what I'd discovered pressing against my chest, demanding confrontation. But I held back, knowing this wasn't the right moment, not when I was still processing the depth of their betrayal. "I should get going," I said, moving toward the door. "Won't you stay for tea?" my mother offered, her social mask firmly in place. "We've barely had a chance to talk since our discussion about the main property." "I have surgery in the morning," I said, the excuse not entirely untrue. "Your career always comes first," my father commented, the familiar criticism sliding into place. Before I could respond, my mother's phone chimed with a text message. She glanced at it, then exchanged a look with my father. "Rachel's not feeling well," she said. "We should check on her." Of course, my father agreed immediately. "Audrey, you understand." It was so predictable it was almost comical. Even now, Rachel's needs superseded everything else. "Perfectly," I said, and left. Back in my Boston apartment that evening, I spread the photographed documents across my dining table. Emails, journal entries, financial records, all painting a clear picture of systematic betrayal spanning decades. My hands trembled as I organized them chronologically, creating a timeline of manipulation. The evidence was irrefutable. My parents and Rachel had conspired to divert my educational funds, sabotage my relationship with Daniel, and systematically undermine my achievements, all while maintaining the fiction of family support. But the final piece of the puzzle emerged when I received a call from my cousin Brian, Aunt Patricia's son. "Audrey," he said after preliminary greetings, "Mom told me what's happening with your family. There's something you should know." "More family secrets?" I asked wearily. "Rachel has been telling extended family members that you have borderline personality disorder," he said bluntly. "She's been spreading this rumor for years, explaining your estrangement from the family as a symptom of mental illness rather than a response to their treatment of you." The cruelty of this fabrication took my breath away. As a medical professional, I knew the stigma attached to mental health diagnoses, how they could be weaponized to discredit someone. Rachel had found the perfect way to ensure that any complaints I might make about family treatment would be dismissed as the ravings of an unstable mind. "She told my wife this at cousin Jennifer's wedding 3 years ago," Brian continued. "Said the family was managing your condition by limiting confrontation and stress." Mom didn't believe it for a second, but others did. I thanked Brian for the information, then sat in silence as night fell outside my windows. The scope of betrayal was so vast, so comprehensive, it defied simple emotions like anger or hurt. My phone rang repeatedly that evening, first my mother, then my father, finally Rachel. I let each call go to voicemail, needing time to process, to plan my response. This wasn't a situation for impulsive action or emotional confrontation. This required strategy. As I finally lay in bed that night, exhausted but unable to sleep, I faced the hardest truth of all. The people who should have loved and supported me unconditionally had instead conspired to undermine and control me at every turn. They had stolen my inheritance, sabotaged my relationship, and attempted to dismantle my career, all while gaslighting me into believing I was the selfish one for pursuing my dreams. The revelation was devastating. but somewhere in the darkness of that long night, I found clarity. This wasn't about money, or property, or even my career. This was about power, about my family's desperate need to control my narrative, my choices, my life. And I was finally ready to take that power back. The next morning, I called in sick to the hospital for the first time in my career. I needed space to think, to feel, to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of order and calm, now felt claustrophobic with the weight of family betrayal. I wandered from room to room, unable to settle. My phone continued to ring with calls from family members, each voicemail more desperate than the last. "Audrey, please call us. We're worried about you," my mother pleaded. "This silent treatment is childish," my father scolded. "You're tearing the family apart," Rachel accused. I silenced the phone and sank onto my sofa, physically and emotionally exhausted. The evidence I'd gathered lay spread across my coffee table, a roadmap of systematic betrayal spanning decades. Journal entries, emails, financial records, all documenting how my family had conspired to undermine me while maintaining the fiction of support. For the first time since I was a child, I allowed myself to cry, truly cry, with the messy, racking sobs I'd always controlled. I cried for the little girl who'd tried so hard to earn approval that was never going to come. I cried for the young woman who'd blamed herself for family distance. I cried for the successful surgeon who still, despite everything, craved the validation of people who had never truly seen her. When the tears finally subsided, I felt hollowed out but somehow lighter. The fog of guilt and obligation had lifted, revealing a painful clarity. This pattern would never change unless I changed my response to it. I picked up a photograph from my bookshelf me at 8 years old, standing proudly beside a science project that had won first place. My smile was gap-toothed and genuine. In the background, my mother was looking not at me but at Rachel, who was tugging at her sleeve for attention. It had always been this way. I had spent my life trying to earn approval through achievement, while Rachel had commanded attention through need. Neither of us had escaped the dynamics unscathed. Rachel's manufactured crises and financial chaos were as much a symptom of our dysfunctional family system as my driven perfectionism. As evening fell, I found myself in my childhood bedroom in a dream. I was sitting on the narrow bed with its practical blue comforter, surrounded by academic trophies and medical textbooks. "You always were the strong one," my grandmother said, sitting beside me though she had been dead for 15 years. "That's why I left you the main house, you know. Not because you were my favorite, but because you were the only one who truly saw it for what it was." "A refuge," I said, understanding what she meant even in the logic of dreams. Not an asset to be liquidated. Exactly. My grandmother's face was kind but serious. "Some people will always see others as resources to be mined, Audrey. You can't change them. You can only change how much access they have to your quarry." I woke with a start, the dream lingering with uncanny clarity. My grandmother had always been direct, practical, unswayed by family drama. She had built a life on her own terms, earning both respect and resentment from my parents. Perhaps that was why they had been so quick to divert her bequest from me. I reminded them too much of her independent spirit. My phone rang, cutting through my thoughts. It was Dr. Helen Montgomery, the hospital director. "Audrey," she said without preamble, "I know you're taking a personal day, and I wouldn't disturb you if it weren't important. We've received an emergency case, a 7-year-old girl with a rare congenital heart defect. The family flew in from Chicago on the recommendation of Dr. Patel. You're the only surgeon on staff with experience in this particular procedure." Work had always been my refuge, the place where my value was clear and unquestioned. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, already moving toward my closet for fresh clothes. The surgery was complex and delicate, requiring absolute focus for nearly 9 hours. In the operating room, the outside world fell away. There was only the patient, the procedure, the intricate dance of saving a life. When I finally emerged, exhausted but successful, The girl's parents embraced me with tears of gratitude. Dr. Mitchell, you've given us our daughter back, the father said, his voice breaking. She's strong, I told them. She did the hard part. I just fixed the plumbing. As I walked to my office to complete the post-operative documentation, I passed the hospital's small chapel. On impulse, I entered the quiet space and sat in the back row. I wasn't particularly religious, but the sacred silence offered a needed respite. In that stillness, I confronted the truth I had been circling. My family would never change. They would continue to take, to manipulate, to undermine, unless I established boundaries with real consequences. But more importantly, I needed to stop seeking validation from people incapable of providing it. My worth wasn't dependent on their approval. It never had been. As if underlining this realization, a text message appeared from Emily, my 10-year-old niece. I got an A on my science project. The one about the heart that you helped me with. Thank you, Aunt Audrey. Attached was a photo of Emily grinning beside a detailed model of the human heart, meticulously labeled and anatomically correct. We had worked on it together during her weekend visit to Boston last month. That simple message clarified everything. My relationship with my nieces and nephew was worth preserving. They deserved an aunt who modeled healthy boundaries and self-respect, not one who enabled toxic family patterns through capitulation. I returned to my apartment late that night with new resolve. The scattered evidence of betrayal still covered my coffee table, but now I saw it differently, not just as proof of pain, but as a tool for change. I spent the next several hours creating a detailed plan. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about establishing reality-based boundaries and consequences after decades of manipulation. It was about breaking the cycle not just for me, but potentially for the next generation. By morning, I had drafted emails, organized financial documents, consulted with my attorney, and created a script for the inevitable confrontation. I had identified my non-negotiables and outlined potential compromises. I had prepared for emotional manipulation tactics and planned my responses. Most importantly, I had shifted my perspective. This wasn't about winning approval or being acknowledged as right. It was about creating a sustainable relationship with my family, one based on reality rather than dysfunction. As dawn broke over Boston, I made coffee and stood at my window, watching the city come alive. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but it would be authentic. I picked up my phone and texted Stephanie. "I'm ready. Can you be there for the family meeting?" Her response was immediate. "Name the time and place. I'll bring reinforcements." Then I called Thomas, who answered on the first ring. "Audrey, I've been worried about you. Are you okay?" "I'm getting there," I said honestly. "I need your help with something important." By midday, the pieces were in place. I had scheduled a family meeting at a neutral location, a private room at Stephanie's law firm. I had arranged for financial and legal advisors to be present. I had prepared documentation and presentation materials. This wouldn't be an emotional confrontation. It would be a professional intervention with clear terms and consequences. My family had always dismissed my emotions, but they respected expertise and authority. I would use that to my advantage. As I packed my briefcase with the necessary materials, my phone rang with a Boston area code I didn't recognize. "Dr. Mitchell," I answered professionally. "Dr. Mitchell, this is Sophia Winters, from the New England Medical Journal. I'm calling about your submission on innovative pediatric cardiac procedures." I had almost forgotten about the research paper I'd submitted months ago, focused as I'd been on family drama. "We're pleased to inform you that your paper has been accepted for publication in our next issue. Furthermore, the editorial board has selected your work for the annual Innovation in Surgical Techniques Award." The recognition was significant, a career milestone that would normally have me calling my parents immediately to share the news. Instead, I felt a quiet satisfaction untainted by the need for external validation. "Thank you," I said simply. "I'm honored." As I hung up, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. I had spent my life seeking approval through achievement, trying to earn the love and respect that should have been freely given. That cycle was finally breaking. My worth wasn't determined by my family's ability to recognize it. My successes weren't diminished by their failure to celebrate them. My choices weren't wrong because they didn't understand them. I was enough, exactly as I was. And that realization, more than any boundary or confrontation, was the true beginning of my healing. The conference room at Stephanie's law firm exuded quiet professionalism: polished mahogany table, ergonomic leather chairs, discreet art on the walls. I had arrived early to prepare, arranging documents and water bottles at each place setting with surgical precision. Stephanie stood at the window, her power suit and confident posture a visual reminder of the support I had. "You're sure about this approach?" she asked, not for the first time. "Absolutely," I said. "They respond to authority and expertise, not emotion. We're meeting them on ground where they can't dismiss me as overly sensitive or dramatic." Thomas arrived next, looking uncomfortable in the formal setting but determined. He had spent the past week reviewing family finances and was still processing the extent of Rachel's deception. "The children are with my parents," he said, taking the seat I indicated. "Rachel doesn't know that I've seen the financial records." My parents arrived precisely on time, my father in his banker's suit, my mother in a conservative dress that spoke of country club luncheons. They regarded the setting with visible apprehension. "Is all this really necessary, Audrey?" my mother asked, gesturing to the formal conference room. "We could have talked at home." "This isn't a casual conversation," I replied evenly. "Please, have a seat." Rachel was 15 minutes late, a power play I had anticipated. She swept in wearing designer clothes that probably represented another credit card charge, her expression a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "What's this about?" she demanded, ignoring the seat next to Thomas in favor of one beside our mother. "Some of us have actual responsibilities, you know." I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I nodded to Stephanie, who closed the door and took her position at the table. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady. "I've asked you here to address some serious concerns about our family dynamics and financial entanglements." "If this is about the main property again," my father started. I raised a hand to stop him. "This is about much more than that. This is about decades of financial and emotional manipulation that ends today." The shock on their faces might have been satisfying under different circumstances. Now, it just confirmed how accustomed they were to controlling the narrative. "I've prepared a presentation," I continued, activating the sleek monitor on the wall. "Everything I'm about to share is documented and verified by financial and legal experts. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically outlined the evidence I had gathered. Journal entries documenting the diversion of my trust fund, emails revealing the conspiracy to sabotage my relationship with Daniel, financial records showing the systematic depletion of family resources to support Rachel's lifestyle, and documentation of the rumors spread about my mental health. I presented it all with clinical detachment, as if delivering a medical case study. No accusations, no emotional outbursts, just facts, dates, figures, and direct quotes. The room grew increasingly tense as the presentation continued. My mother's face had gone pale. My father's jaw clenched tight. Rachel alternated between defensive scoffing and stunned silence. "This is absurd," she finally burst out. "You're taking things completely out of context." "Which part is out of context, Rachel?" I asked calmly. "The credit cards Thomas doesn't know about? The loans taken against his 401k without proper authorization? Or perhaps the emails where you and our parents strategized how to break up my engagement?" Thomas turned to Rachel, his expression hardened. "Is it true? About the 401k? Rachel's momentary flicker of guilt confirmed the truth before she could deny it. "This is a family matter," my father interjected, attempting to regain control of the situation. "We don't need outsiders involved." He glanced pointedly at Stephanie. "That's exactly the attitude that has enabled this dysfunction for decades," I replied. the belief that family loyalty means accepting manipulation and abuse without question. Abuse? My mother echoed, genuinely shocked. We have always supported you, Audrey. Have you? I pulled up the next slide, showing a clear accounting of the educational trust fund that had been diverted from me to Rachel. Was it supportive to use the money Grandma Mitchell explicitly left for my education to pay for Rachel's credit card debt and wedding? Was it supportive to actively work to sabotage my relationship with Daniel? Was it supportive to spread rumors about me having mental illness to explain why I might object to these behaviors? My mother looked to my father, clearly expecting him to take control of the situation. He cleared his throat, shifting into the authoritative tone that had silenced family discussions throughout my childhood. Audrey, you're blowing things out of proportion. Yes, perhaps we made some questionable financial decisions, but it was always with the family's best interests at heart. Rachel wanted. I corrected him. There's a difference, and the family's best interests seem remarkably aligned with whatever Rachel wants at any given moment. Rachel stood up abruptly. I'm not going to sit here and be attacked. I've sacrificed everything for this family. My career, my independence, your financial solvency, I added calmly. Your honesty, your husband's trust. Thomas looked at his wife with new clarity. You told me you wanted to stay home with the children. That was your choice, Rachel. Don't use it as a weapon now. Rachel's eyes widened at this unexpected challenge from her usually acquiescent husband. She turned to our parents for support, the established pattern of family dynamics activating automatically. Mom, Dad, are you going to let them gang up on me like this? My mother half rose, the instinct to protect Rachel overriding everything else. My father placed a restraining hand on her arm. Sit down, Diane, he said quietly. I think we need to hear this. It was the first time I could remember my father not immediately rushing to Rachel's defense. The slight shift in dynamics was subtle but significant. I continued with my presentation, now focusing on the financial analysis Stephanie's team had prepared. Rachel and Thomas have combined unsecured debt of approximately $450,000, I explained. The interest payments alone are unsustainable on Thomas's income. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad have refinanced their mortgage, depleting their retirement security. This situation cannot continue. So what do you suggest? My father asked, his tone more subdued now. If you're not willing to sell the main property, I'm proposing an actual solution, not a temporary band-aid, I replied. I've consulted with financial advisors who specialize in debt restructuring and family wealth management. I outlined the plan I had developed. A structured debt repayment program for Rachel and Thomas, financial counseling as a condition of any family assistance, the establishment of educational trusts for the children that could not be accessed by Rachel, and a retirement security plan for my parents that would protect their assets from future financial crises. Additionally, I continued, I'm willing to cover the cost of family therapy to address the dysfunctional patterns that have led us here. Therapy? My mother scoffed. We don't need therapy. We need practical solutions. The practical solution is right in front of you, I said. But it requires acknowledging the problem honestly. This isn't about money, it's about patterns of behavior that have damaged all of us. Even you, Rachel, I added, turning to my sister. You're trapped in a cycle of spending to maintain appearances, accumulating debt that creates stress, then spending more to escape that stress. It's unsustainable, financially and emotionally. For the first time, Rachel didn't immediately react with defensiveness. A flicker of recognition crossed her face before she masked it. I do not have a spending problem, she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. The credit card statements suggest otherwise, Thomas said quietly. As do the unopened bills I found hidden in your desk drawer. Rachel turned on him, betrayal in her eyes. You went through my things? After learning you went through our retirement account without my knowledge? Yes, I did. Thomas's voice was steady, his newfound backbone evident. I love you, Rachel, but this can't continue. Not if we want to stay married. The direct consequence shocked Rachel into momentary silence. The threat to her carefully constructed image of perfect family life was far more effective than any appeal to financial responsibility could have been. My father cleared his throat again, attempting to reassert control over the situation. "What exactly are you proposing, Audrey?" In concrete terms. I laid out the specific conditions for my assistance: financial transparency, professional counseling, structured repayment plans, and clear boundaries around future requests for money. No more blank checks, literal or figurative. "And if we don't agree to these terms?" my mother asked. "Then you proceed without my involvement," I said simply. "I won't sell the main property. I won't contribute to debt repayment. I won't continue to enable patterns that are destroying this family financially and emotionally." "You would abandon your family over this?" My mother's voice rose with genuine distress. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I corrected her. "I'm offering real help instead of a quick fix. I'm offering a path toward health instead of continuing dysfunction. It's your choice whether to take it." Rachel, ever strategic, tried a new approach. "What about the children? Would you punish them for their parents' mistakes?" "The children's educational needs will be provided for regardless," I said, having anticipated this manipulation tactic. "I've already established trusts in their names that can only be accessed for education and healthcare." Thomas looked at me with surprise and gratitude. "You did that?" "When?" "Last week. They're my nieces and nephew, Thomas. I love them unconditionally, just as I wish someone had loved me at their age." The simple truth hung in the air, more powerful than any accusation could have been. My father, pragmatic even in crisis, recognized the strength of my position. "Your terms seem reasonable," he admitted reluctantly, "but this approach feels unnecessarily formal." "The formality is necessary precisely because informal family agreements have been repeatedly violated," I explained. "Trust has been broken at a fundamental level. Rebuilding it requires structure and accountability." "I can't believe you're even considering this," Rachel said to our parents, incredulous. "She's blackmailing us!" "No, Rachel," Thomas interjected. "She's setting boundaries. There's a difference." "Since when are you on her side?" Rachel demanded. "I'm on the side of fixing this mess," Thomas replied. "For our children's future, if nothing else." The discussion continued for nearly 3 hours, cycling through resistance, negotiation, emotional manipulation attempts, and finally, tentative acceptance. My mother cried. My father blustered. Rachel alternated between victim posturing and hostile accusations. Through it all, I maintained my professional demeanor, neither yielding to emotional appeals nor responding in kind to attacks. Stephanie provided legal perspective when needed. Thomas, to his credit, remained firm in his commitment to addressing the financial deception. By late afternoon, we had reached a tentative agreement. My parents would work with a financial advisor to restructure their mortgage and secure their retirement. Rachel and Thomas would enter credit counseling and adhere to a strict repayment plan. Family therapy would be attempted, though my mother remained skeptical of its value. As we prepared to leave, Rachel made one last attempt to re-establish the old dynamic. "I hope you're happy," she said bitterly. "You've finally proven you're better than me." I looked at my sister, truly looked at her perhaps for the first time. Behind the hostility, I saw fear and insecurity, the desperate need to maintain a facade of perfection at any cost. "This was never a competition, Rachel," I said quietly. "That's what I've been trying to tell you for 34 years. Her expression flickered with something like recognition before hardening again. "Easy for you to say. You've always had everything come easily to you." "No," I corrected her. "I've worked incredibly hard for everything I've achieved. The difference is, I never expected anyone else to pay for my choices." As Rachel turned away, I added, "I meant what I said about family therapy. Not to assign blame, but to break patterns that are hurting all of us, including you." For the briefest moment, I glimpsed vulnerability in my sister's eyes, a crack in the armor of resentment and entitlement. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar mask of righteous indignation as she swept from the room. My parents followed, subdued and uncertain in this new reality where they could no longer control the narrative. My father paused at the door. "This isn't how families should handle disagreements," he said, a final attempt to reassert traditional authority. "No," I agreed. "Families should handle disagreements with honesty, respect, and genuine concern for each other's well-being." I'm still waiting for that approach to start. As the door closed behind them, leaving just Thomas, Stephanie, and me in the conference room, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, grief for the family relationships I had always wanted but never truly had, relief at finally establishing boundaries, and cautious hope that real change might be possible, even if the path would be difficult. That was. Thomas searched for the right word. Impressive, and long overdue. "It's just the beginning," Stephanie reminded us. "Patterns like these don't change overnight." "No," I agreed, "but they don't change at all without intervention." For the first time in my adult life, I had faced my family's dysfunction directly, without flinching or yielding. I had named the manipulation, presented the evidence, and established consequences without allowing guilt or obligation to derail me. I had reclaimed my power, and regardless of what happened next, I would never go back to the dynamics that had diminished me for so long. 6 months passed, a season of change both literal and metaphorical. Winter had given way to spring, and with it came new growth in unexpected places. I stood in my grandmother's kitchen in the Maine coastal house, brewing coffee as morning light spilled through windows that offered glimpses of the Atlantic. The property I had refused to sell had become a true refuge during this period of family transformation. The kitchen table was set for breakfast. Not just for me, but for guests arriving soon, my family, coming together for the first time since our confrontation in Stephanie's conference room. The doorbell rang, and I took a steadying breath before answering. Thomas stood on the porch with Emily, Joshua, and Lily, their faces bright with excitement. "Aunt Audrey!" Lily launched herself into my arms, while the older children hugged me more sedately but no less genuinely. "Is it really true we get to sleep in the lighthouse bedroom?" "Absolutely," I confirmed, returning their embraces. "I've got it all set up for you." Thomas handed me a bouquet of fresh flowers. "From our garden," he explained. "Rachel's project this spring." The mention of my sister brought a momentary tension. "She's still coming?" Thomas nodded. "She's following separately. Needed some time too." He glanced at the children, choosing his words carefully. "Process." I understood. This weekend represented a significant shift in family dynamics, and Rachel would find it the most challenging. Her status as the family's emotional center of gravity had been permanently altered. My parents arrived next, looking older somehow, more vulnerable. My father carried a box of old photo albums, my mother a homemade pie, neither peace offering exactly, but gestures toward a new kind of relationship. "The house looks wonderful," my mother commented, her eyes taking in the fresh paint and updated furnishings. "You've really made it your own." "Grandma would approve," I said, accepting the compliment for what it was, an acknowledgement of my right to this inheritance, this space, this part of our family history. Rachel arrived last, her entrance lacking the dramatic flair I had come to expect. She looked different subtly, but significantly changed. The designer outfit was gone, replaced by casual clothes that actually suited her better. Her makeup was minimal, her expression guarded but not hostile. "Nice place," she said simply, stepping inside. "I can see why you fought for it." It wasn't an apology, but from Rachel, the acknowledgement represented progress. The weekend unfolded with cautious optimism. There were awkward moments, old patterns threatening to resurface when my father questioned my surgical schedule, or my mother made pointed comments about career women. But unlike before, these moments were recognized and often redirected, sometimes by me, sometimes surprisingly by others. "Mom," Thomas said firmly when my mother began a familiar lament about my working hours, "Audrey saves children's lives. That deserves respect, not criticism. My father, perhaps the most resistant to change, nonetheless made efforts in his own way. He asked genuine questions about my recent research publication, listening to the answers without immediately changing the subject to Rachel's activities. The most significant changes were evident in Rachel herself. 6 months of financial counseling and therapy had begun to shift her perspective. She was working part-time now as an event coordinator, using skills she had honed through years of volunteer work. "It's not brain surgery," she said with a wry smile when I asked about her job. "But I'm good at it, and it turns out I like earning my own money." The subtle dig comparing her work to mine might once have irritated me. Now I recognized it as Rachel's way of acknowledging the gap between our achievements while still validating her own path. The real breakthrough came on Saturday evening. The children were playing board games with Thomas and my father, while my mother rested upstairs. Rachel and I found ourselves alone on the deck overlooking the ocean. "I've been seeing Dr. Levinson," she said abruptly, naming the therapist I had recommended months ago. "She thinks I have something called narcissistic traits. Not the full personality disorder, but enough to complicate things." The vulnerability of this admission was unprecedented. "That must have been difficult to hear," I said carefully. Rachel nodded, watching the waves rather than looking at me. "She says it developed as a response to our family dynamics. The golden child syndrome, she calls it. Being put on a pedestal while simultaneously being expected to fulfill others' expectations." "That makes sense," I acknowledged. "You were carrying the emotional burden of our parents' dreams, just as I was carrying the burden of their disappointment." "I was jealous of you," Rachel admitted, still not meeting my eyes. "Your clarity, your purpose, your freedom to define success on your own terms. I never had that." "I was jealous of you too," I confessed. "The ease with which you received love and approval, the certainty you seemed to feel about your choices. An illusion," she said with a bitter laugh. "I was never certain, just afraid of disappointing everyone. And now I have anyway." We sat in silence for a moment, the years of competition and resentment slowly giving way to something approaching understanding, if not yet forgiveness. "The kids adore you," Rachel said eventually. "Emily wants to be a doctor now. She has a little lab coat she wears around the house." "She's brilliant," I said. "She asked me questions about the circulatory system that some of my medical students couldn't answer." Another silence, more comfortable this time. "I'm sorry," Rachel said finally. "For a lot of things. The emails, the rumors, Daniel. I can't change any of it, but I am sorry." It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of everything she had done, but it was a start. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." Our conversation was interrupted by Lily calling us to join the game night. The moment of connection was brief but significant, a small step toward a different kind of sister relationship. The family healing process continued in fits and starts over the following months. My parents attended therapy sporadically, more committed to maintaining appearances than to deep change. But even their limited participation led to small improvements. My father stopped using financial support as a control mechanism. My mother occasionally caught herself before making comparative comments about our different life choices. I maintained firm boundaries, no longer allowing guilt or obligation to override my self-respect. I declined invitations that felt manipulative, enforced consequences when agreements were broken, and celebrated genuine efforts toward healthier interactions. Most significantly, I met Michael Brennan, a pediatric oncologist who understood the demands of my career because he shared them. Our relationship developed naturally, without the pressure of family expectations or artificial timelines. When I brought Michael to a family dinner 6 months after our main weekend, the reactions were telling. My mother made one reflexive comment about finally settling down before catching herself. My father actually engaged Michael in conversation about his research rather than immediately steering the discussion toward Rachel's children. Rachel, perhaps most surprisingly, made a genuine effort to connect with Michael without the subtle undermining that had characterized her interactions with Daniel. Later, she confided that her therapist had helped her recognize how her sabotage of my relationships had been driven by fear of losing her position as the family's emotional center. Besides, she added with something approaching her old humor, if you're happily paired off, maybe mom will finally stop using you as her cautionary tale about career women ending up alone. The road to family healing wasn't straight or simple. There were setbacks, old patterns that resurfaced in times of stress, manipulations attempted, and boundaries tested. But with each cycle, the recovery came faster, the recognition of unhealthy dynamics more immediate. I found unexpected meaning in mentoring young women facing similar family pressures. Emily was just the first. Soon I was speaking at career days at local schools, sharing not just my medical knowledge but my hard-won wisdom about defining success on one's own terms. You can love your family deeply while still refusing to be diminished by them, I told a group of teenage girls at a STEM leadership conference. Your worth isn't determined by their ability to recognize it. On a crisp autumn day, almost exactly 1 year after the Thanksgiving dinner that had catalyzed so much change, I received a package from my mother. Inside was a framed newspaper clipping of my recent Medical Innovation Award, along with a brief note. We may not always understand your choices, but we are proud of what you've accomplished. It wasn't a complete transformation. The note still contained a hint of the old conditional approval, but it represented progress, a recognition, however limited, of my value beyond traditional female roles. That evening, as Michael and I walked along the Boston Harbor, I reflected on how far I had come. Not just in my career or relationships, but in my understanding of family dynamics and self-worth. You know what I've learned? I said, watching sailboats return to harbor as sunset painted the sky. Family trauma repeats until someone has the courage to face it directly. Michael squeezed my hand. And you had that courage? Not at first, I admitted. It took hitting rock bottom to find it. The important thing is that you did find it, he reminded me. And in doing so, you might have broken the cycle for the next generation. Emily, Joshua, Lily, they'll grow up seeing that it's possible to set boundaries, to demand respect, to define success on your own terms. He was right. That was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of this difficult year, not just my own healing, but the potential to spare my nieces and nephew the legacy of toxic family patterns. My sister had mocked me for not having a husband or children. My parents had laughed, and for a moment I had doubted my life choices. But now I understood with complete clarity. My worth had never been determined by my marital status or reproductive choices. My value as a woman, as a person, came from within, from my compassion, my integrity, my courage to live authentically, despite pressure to conform. And that was a lesson worth all the pain it had taken to learn. Has anyone in your family ever tried to make you feel less valuable because you chose a different path? Drop a comment below and share your experience. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for healthy relationships. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' expectations. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, the family you choose can be as important as the family you're born into. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.